Welcome to Guyana 411. This week we take a look at the 4 important issues engaging the attention of the Caribbean community. I am Renetta LaFleur. Stay tuned. In the Caribbean region, climate change involves threats, risks, challenges, and opportunities as the region faces the impacts of climate change.
Given the geographic location of Caribbean territories, focused attention on the issue of climate change is needed as it threatens their existence. Among these are the effects of climate change, a result of greenhouse gas emissions from fossil fuels and other sources which threaten our very survival.
You're seeing live footage of a tsunami engulfing the port area.
When the ominous Black Sea attacked this island nation Friday, it left behind a massive trail of destruction that is getting worse by the hour.
CARICOM member states are vulnerable to the impacts of climate change. The poor condition of upland watersheds and the felling of mangrove forests, particularly in the larger countries of Belize, Guyana and Suriname, make inland areas very susceptible to property and infrastructural damage from flooding. Additionally, the production of electricity by power companies in the Caribbean consume the largest amount of fossil fuels, making them the greatest contributors of emissions of carbon monoxide. This gas affects the Earth's ozone layer. However, the islands of the Caribbean are not considered to be major producers of greenhouse gases. Prime Minister of the Commonwealth of Dominica, Roosevelt Skerrit, at the opening ceremony of the 37th regular meeting of the Conference of Heads of Government of CARICOM explains.
Faced with the threat of climate change, we have to take steps to both adapt to that phenomenon and to mitigate its effects. The use of costly fossil fuels has been associated with rising levels of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. It is therefore in our economic and environmental interests to explore the huge potential that exists in the Caribbean for exploiting renewable sources of energy, such as sun, wind, and geothermal. With appropriate technology and investment, we can therefore maximize the economic potential of these natural resources in an effort to reduce our energy costs, our dependence on fossil fuels, and our carbon footprint.
Responding to climate change within the context of an increasingly globalized world economy is a particularly difficult challenge for the fragile economies of small Caribbean states. To reduce their vulnerability and build their resilience to climate change, it is imperative that CARICOM member governments treat climate change as a developmental issue and formulate and implement cost-effective policies and measures to ensure that these risks posed to the development of their region are significantly reduced.
While we focused individually on our respective national challenges, it is imperative that we engage and develop regional and international strategies in our efforts to achieve economies of scale and collectively address those issues that affect us in common. The establishment of CARICOM by the Treaty of Chaguaramas on July 4, 1973, was based on this premise. It was envisaged as a vehicle through which countries could best pursue a united and integrated community, defending common interests while responding to global challenges.
The 2015 United Nations Climate Change Conference, or COP21, which was held in Paris, France from November 30 to December 12, saw the Paris Agreement being negotiated for a global agreement on the reduction of climate change. The agreement will become legally binding if joined by at least 55 countries. These will represent at least 55% of global greenhouse emissions. CARICOM Secretary General, Ambassador Erwin LaRocque, explains.
This issue is extremely important for our region, the issue of climate change. As you know, we have long held the position that there ought to be, we must address the situation as it has begun to impact our region already. some of the very, very critical issues that are facing us is the issue of global warming in particular, and what should be an appropriate target for us to try to achieve. We are currently experiencing severe climatic events in our region, so we know that climate change is upon us, and we certainly cannot leave here without some indication or some setting of a goal of seeking to achieve 1.5 degrees for the continued survival of our region.
For Guyana, the country will continue to be in the forefront of advancing the issue of climate change by making efforts to develop and implement a national readiness plan for reducing emissions from deforestation and degradation. With 80% of Guyana being covered with untouched, pristine rainforests, the nation has taken several initiatives to ensure that its rainforests remain intact. The impact of climate change is trickling down to many small nations. Ghana stands to be severely affected if climate change is not taken seriously. Most of the population and businesses are located along the coastlands, which are approximately 6 feet below sea level. Efforts are on the way to address this issue.
Over the next 6 months to a year, we will be working closely with international partners, other sector agencies, to craft a national climate change policy, which would then inform the respective sectoral plans, because it is necessary that we mainstream or integrate climate actions into all our development planning, social, environmental, economic activities. We would also be focusing on establishing the necessary institutional framework for greater coordination, collaboration, cooperation, information sharing, as we seek to develop and implement plans which would address Guyana's vulnerability to climate change.
The Caribbean Community's Climate Change Center coordinates the region's response to climate change, working on effective solutions and projects to combat the environmental impacts of this effect. It provides climate change-related policy advice and guidelines to CARICOM member states through the Secretariat and to United Nations Overseas Caribbean Territories. Prime Minister of St. Lucia, Alan Castanet, explains.
It's now a matter of implementing policy. So we can't keep talking that we're a vulnerable region and we don't act like it. So meaning, again, when it comes to credibility, when we travel, what types of cars do we go to? What kind of hotels do we stay in? In our own countries, are we practicing good, sustainable habits? So you can't be out the world asking and clamoring for assistance on the basis of your own vulnerability. And in my mind, you've not taken the initiative to be able to live by your own standards.
Recognizing that the Caribbean is already experiencing the impacts of climate change and climate variability, countries have already been undertaking work within their respective mandates to ensure their resilience. These activities are articulated in the region's implementation plan, which is used to guide regional and national approaches to enhancing the region's response to the impacts of climate change.
The Caribbean community's leaders are seeking to address the barriers that affect the full implementation of the creation of a single enlarged economic space.
In 1989, regional heads of government adopted the Grand Anse Declaration, which was designed to facilitate the launch of a Caribbean Community CARICOM Single Market and Economy CSME. The CSME was established in 2006 after 13 years of deliberation and had several intentions. One included to enable the free movement of goods and services, capital and labor, to increase intra-regional cross-border trade and investment, and 3, to improve the region's international competitiveness. 10 years later, many lament that very little progress has been demonstrably achieved. At the 37th regular meeting of the Conference of Heads of Government of CARICOM in Guyana from June 4th to 6th, heads committed to removing the obstacles to the smooth functioning of the initiative. Ghana's President David Granger spoke to the media just seconds before entering a private caucus to discuss the issue.
We are committed to removing any obstacles to the smooth functioning of the Caribbean single market and economy, and we're going to go into caucus.
Despite the arrangement of the CSME, the regional heads have been unable to expedite meaningfully intra-regional cross-border trade and investment. Prime Minister of Barbados, Fondel Stewart, has lead responsibility for the CSME within the quasi-CARICOM cabinet. During the discussions, Barbados highlighted some of the implementation issues with regards to the CSME.
So far as the Caribbean single market and economy is concerned, we made an intervention on that to explain that one of the biggest problems we have in terms of the functioning of the organs of the community, those organs that would facilitate the achievement of the goals we've set for ourselves so far as single market and economy are concerned, is that some of the organs on which you are relying do not even meet. The Council of Finance and Planning does not meet, and this is usually ministers of finance, most of whom are heads of government.
During the caucus, Barbados had to present a report of the Commission on the economy. The Barbadian Prime Minister said that this report should have gone to the Council of Finance and Planning, but could not, since this governance structure does not meet.
The Legal Affairs Committee, it does not meet either. Or when it does meet, you cannot get a quorum. Even by video conference, you can't get a quorum sometimes with the Legal Affairs Committee. And this is the Committee of Attorneys General that is supposed to study and to analyze and to advise on the instruments that we draft for a final signature by heads of government so that there can be onward movement with the decisions that we take.
St. Vincent and the Grenadines Prime Minister Dr. Ralph Gonsalves expressed similar views that the heads needed to make the governance structure work to pursue better the goal of a single economy.
The Council of Ministers of Finance and Planning need to meet when they're supposed to meet and take certain decisions. The Attorneys General, the Legal Affairs Committee, because you have to have the legislative work done. You have to strengthen the Secretariat with the nature of the legislative draftspersons and so on and so forth.
Prime Minister Gonsalves, however, reminded that CARICOM is a community of sovereign states constantly groping for consensus.
I come back to make this very important point, which I made in my opening speech. I don't know if persons understand the significance of it. CARICOM is not a confederation, a federation, or a unitary state. It's a community of independent sovereign states. There is no central executive mechanism like the European Commission to drive the process. The Secretariat is not endowed with those powers, and that the authoritative supranational institution is the CCJ, as determined in the Shanique Myrie case and other cases. So I think those things have to be appreciated. You may say, well, why don't you have an executive commission, European Union style? You attempt to do that. I bet you that in Jamaica, the popular press will say, what happened? You're looking for a federation through the back door.
Since the implementation of the CSME, intra-CARICOM trade has remained largely unchanged. Cross-border investment has largely meant firms from Trinidad and Tobago or Barbados expanding into other Caribbean jurisdictions. CARICOM countries are also highly indebted, with the regional average debt-to-GDP ratio having risen rapidly. Both Prime Minister Stewart and Gonsalves agreed that if the governance structure of CSME is improved, then these issues would be resolved.
The Council of Ministers of Finance and Planning need to meet when they're supposed to meet and take certain decisions. The Attorneys General, the Legal Affairs Committee, because you have to have the legislative work done. You have to strengthen the Secretariat with the nature of the legislative draftspersons and so on and so forth. So all of these things are works in progress.
With regards to the single market aspect of the CSME, intra-regional travel is still very difficult for both business and leisure purposes. Prime Minister Stewart says Barbados is committed to playing its role.
We're all committed to freedom of movement, and I think the cases where a few persons may have had difficulties at our borders have attracted more attention than the thousands who have no problems at all. You know the old saying that if a dog bites a man, that is not news, but if a man bites a dog, that is news.
During the 3 days, the member states with specific issues on the freedom of movement under the CSME had a chance to have these concerns addressed. Secretary General of the Caribbean Community, Ambassador Erwin LaRock, is of the view that the criteria for right of entry is the judgment of each member state.
It is accepted that member states have the right to deny entry. However, the Caribbean Court of Justice has ruled on the specific circumstances under which they may do so, and provide guidance on the procedures that should be followed once that course of action is taken. To help in remedying some of the problems, we must increase the training and sensitization of our immigration officials for them to act more closely in line with the policies agreed to by their governments.
10 years after it came into being, despite the challenges, CARICOM member states remain resolute that there is a future in the CSME. St. Vincent and the Grenadines Prime Minister and Ambassador LaRock expressed the view that CSME remains the only workable option for the region's economic growth.
While we have made progress, there is no denying that we could have been further ahead, although challenges remain in some areas. We must do what is required to move the process forward.
I know some people could get impatient with some of the administrative problems in some countries. That's the freedom of movement issue which I've just addressed. The right of establishment of businesses. Before you used to have a lot of hassles. You don't have it now. Though we need to harmonize the requisite laws, the company laws, fiscal incentives, etc., to make it even easier. And some of those things are in the works. There are persons who are asking about what about convergence in relation to the banking issue. Well, is it convergence involving a common currency, a uniform currency? You have a lot of problems with that. Is it convergence with the nature of the exchange rate? Well, you have the US. Some of the country, well, most of them are pegged to the US dollar, some are floating in respect of the US dollar. And what you need to ensure is that in facilitating trade, that you go to Trinidad, for instance, that when you're paid in TT dollars, that you can get your US dollars pretty easily at the central bank. And the central banks are dealing with that. But again, there are some hiccups. So you notice I'm talking about progress, but I'm talking also of some challenges in implementation and some other things which need to be done. But it's good that there's a sense of renewed urgency in it rather than, quote unquote, the idea of a pause.
The issue of making the initiative stronger will take center stage again at the 28th Intersessional Heads of Government meeting, expected to be held in Guyana in February of 2017. Ghana's President David Granger will then assume the chairmanship of CARICOM.
Member states are increasing their levels of cooperation to address various evolving threats as security remains at the forefront of the Caribbean region's priorities.
Caribbean member states face several threats to stability and peace of the region. Security and the need for members to combine their resources to address these security issues was one of the main areas of focus of the 37th regular meeting from the 4th to the 6th of July 2016 in Georgetown of CARICOM Heads of Government. The meeting advanced matters pertaining to regional security of the approximately 16 million people of CARICOM.
The issue of security also occupied a very big chunk of the time allotted for discussions over the last couple of days. And we were brought up to date on major issues with respect to the region's security and agreed on ways to deepen and strengthen cooperation in this area. We approved a review of the CARICOM Crime and Security Strategy, CCSS, and discussed ways of ensuring that there was coordination between national security plans and the strategy.
The Caribbean Community Crime and Security Strategy, CCSS, for 2015 to 2019 identifies 8 areas for immediate focus. These include deepening crime prevention initiatives and programs, facilitating justice reform, pursuing functional cooperative security arrangements to tackle and manage shared risks and threats, enhancing human resource capabilities, strengthening regional security systems, strengthening CARICOM borders, and enhancing maritime and airspace awareness. Discussions were focused on deepening and strengthening cooperation between member states in relation to these areas. One such area saw the introduction of an arrest warrant treaty.
The arrest warrant treaty would enhance law enforcement ability to address matters of cross-border crimes. So if we were to enter into this treaty, if someone from Dominica were to commit a crime in Dominica and move to St. Vincent, then these Vincentian authorities would be able to have him arrested and repatriated to Dominica to face charges.
The Dominican Prime Minister says that a mutual legal assistance agreement for member states will also boost the crime fight.
The training of personnel, the joint training of personnel, all of these elements, we believe, will certainly enhance the collaboration and cooperation among law enforcement entities and ensuring that we can enhance the security of our region.
The Regional Security System, RSS, was created out of a need for a collective response to security threats which were impacting on the stability of the region in the early 70s and 1980s. The Memorandum of Understanding was updated in 1992, and the RSS required judicial status in March of 1996. The Caribbean Basin Security Initiative, CBSI, brings all members of the Caribbean Community, CARICOM, and the Dominican Republic together to jointly collaborate on regional security with the United States as a partner. The USA is making a significant contribution to CBSI, committing some $263 million in funding since 2010. The CARICOM members also collaborate by participating in exercise Tradewind, which supports the CBSI. The CARICOM Implementation Agency for Crime and Security, IMPACS, remains essential in addressing crime and security. This agency is collaborating with law enforcement counterparts across the region and international stakeholders such as Interpol and the Federal Bureau of Investigation. The growing influence of money laundering and efforts to combat this are also being addressed by CARICOM. Correspondent banking and the attendant economic risks are among the top agenda issues for the regional grouping of 15 members and 5 associate states. Some international banking institutions are seeking to withdraw their services from regional partners. Prime Minister of Antigua and Barbuda, Gaston Brown, has been tasked with representing CARICOM in this issue. This includes approaches to the United Nations, the World Trade Organization, and the United States government.
Fundamental implications to trade, not only physical goods, but even services. So for example, I spoke about remittances earlier in terms of Caribbeaners who are living in the diaspora to remit funds to their loved ones in the Caribbean. If we become unbanked, then they will not be able to remit those proceeds. In addition to that, even tourism. You may have some difficulties in which tourists may have problems making the payments.
The genesis of these issues lies in the signal being sent by several international banks, mainly based in the United States and Europe, to client banks in the region of their unwillingness to continue carrying their business. This is being titled a de-risking strategy. At CARICOM's intersessional meeting in Belize, it was emphasized that member states have complied with all global regulatory standards, including those established by the Financial Action Task Force, FATF, and the Global Forum. They have also been scrutinized in every detail by the International Monetary Fund and other multilateral institutions. CARICOM deems the action by corresponding banks as an economic assault tantamount to an economic blockade against member states.
It is fundamental that we remain a part of the international payment system. I mean, to delink us from the international payment system is to literally plunge the people of the Caribbean into unemployment and poverty.
CARICOM is planning a stakeholder conference to address these issues before the end of 2016.
In which we could invite the corresponding banking officials as well as the responding banks officials, the regulators, policymakers, individuals who operate various NGOs, to include charities, to bring the various stakeholders together, even central bankers, so that we can address the issues and to appeal to the regulators in those countries as well as the corresponding banks that there are some significant unintended consequences that could literally result in a degradation in living standards of Caribbean people, that it represents a serious threat, easily one of the most serious threats facing the region.
The Antiguan Prime Minister stresses that CARICOM remains committed to the fight against money laundering and the financing of terrorism.
De-risking and its unintended consequences clearly would have created a very inequitable position for certain small states and regions, especially those of us here in the Caribbean. So we continue to fight this issue, and the whole idea now is to extend the issue now to include other stakeholders, to also employ other advocacy groups, probably a lobby group out of the United States, and just to make sure that we address the issue in all fora, nationally, regionally, and internationally.
Heads of government also considered the border issues between Guyana and Venezuela and Belize and Guatemala. The community has consistently expressed its full commitment to the preservation of the territorial integrity of all member states.
CARICOM countries recognize the need to unify, to ensure a concerted approach to issues of importance to their existence. Energy supply for the region is a critical area that has received attention.
Focused attention on energy resulted in the formation of an energy policy in 2013 for CARICOM, culminating years of work and an energy ministers meeting. Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago, Dr. Keith Rowley, speaks of the importance of placing collective emphasis on the region's energy.
Energy is an area where, regardless of what the state of the economy is or the size of the economy, the energy economy is central. Trinidad and Tobago, as a producer of energy and a trader of energy, will have to move, given what the international market has become and what the competition has become. Trinidad and Tobago will have to move towards considering greater investment in the region's energy security, and we are moving in that direction.
CARICOM's energy policy outlines a wide range of areas to be addressed at the regional level. However, member states' acceptance of this policy means that they have committed to developing national policies which will harmonize efforts at the regional level. CARICOM's Assistant Secretary General, Joseph Cox, explains the need to secure energy for the region.
Access to affordable energy services is a necessary requirement for addressing sustainable development within Caribbean countries. The transformation of our energy economies from their current state of inefficiency and overdependence on imported fossil fuel sources, which exposes us to the uncertainties and volatilities of mostly expensive global oil prices, to a state of greater efficiency and high penetration of clean indigenous renewable sources, will not only allow us to play our part in global climate mitigation efforts, recognizing that collectively we contribute less than 0.2% of greenhouse gas emissions, but also facilitate our ability to implement some of the measures that are necessary for climate adaptation.
This resulted in a study and business innovation model aimed at building capacity amongst renewable energy project developers, entrepreneurs, and researchers in the promotion of technical innovation in the field. The study also facilitates access to funding for renewable energy research and development of project proposals under the EU Economic Partnership Agreement. Energy scientist and former chairman of COTED's Special Meeting on Energy, Philip Paulwell, explains other measures adopted by the region on energy.
Individually, we have implemented a number of projects, and many of us have moved even further and developed national energy policies comprising detailed programs and ambitious implementation schedules. It was in 2004 that the Caribbean Renewable Energy Development Program was established, and today it has become the keystone of sustainable energy initiatives in the region. Since its inception, it has served as an important catalyst for advancing renewable energy in CARICOM. Arising from this project and other regional level initiatives, a number of important products have been fashioned in support of the harnessing and development of renewable energy. However, Although sustainable energy solutions have made great strides in our region, many significant gaps and barriers remain. In the coming decades, these barriers to renewable energy access, energy efficiency, and reliable grid development and deployment must be overcome.
Towards ensuring sustainable energy sources are established within the region, the impacts of climate change must also be mitigated.
For the majority of our countries, imported petroleum and petroleum products is a chief source of primary commercial energy. But our countries, though dependent, are not major players in the global oil markets and are therefore hostage to the vagaries of supply and price. The volume of GDP and foreign exchange resources that are being spent by SIDS to pay for energy imports could have otherwise been directed to alleviating poverty, adapting to climate change and sea level rise, and other critical interventions which are necessary for sustainable development and resilience building. Combating climate change, promoting sustainable development, and addressing the vulnerabilities of SIDS, including the energy challenge, requires, as a basic principle, the sharing of information, exchange of knowledge, the building of capacity, and the raising of awareness.
With a regional energy policy formulated, phase 1 of its implementation will see member states working towards fulfilling outlined targets.
Within CARICOM, the aggregated contribution of renewable power to the electricity sector has almost doubled over the last decade, from around 5% in 2005 to 9.1% in 2015. We recognize, however, that given the enormous scale of the resource to our respective countries, renewable energy can and should be contributing more to the diversification of the regional energy mix. This recognition has now been formalized through targets for the aggregated contribution of renewable energy to power generation within the region, viz. 47% by 2027.
The region has committed to continue working on energy to ensure access to affordable, adequate, safe, and clean energy products necessary for the development of member states and for the consolidation of the CARICOM single market and economy.
Concludes this week's edition of Guyana 411. Subscribe to our website and YouTube channel to be kept abreast of the latest developments. You can also like us on our Facebook page. Do join us again next week for another edition of Guyana 411. Thank you for watching.